Welcome back everyone to another brief discussion on Pokemon. This is gonna be a bit of a weird video. I barely ever talk about actual overused Pokemon. I find it more interesting to talk about less good Pokemon is the nicest way to say it. But RBY Jolteon has been pretty down bad lately. We hate to see it. Just like how we hate to see a weird glitch with my match recordings where I can't switch sides, but okay, whatever, that's not important. What is important is that Jolteon, as of earlier this year, is now the lowest rank overused Pokemon. Now under last year's bottom place Slowbro, a Pokemon that Jolteon directly counters. Usually. Yikes. How exactly is that determined though? Well, it's a bit of a long story, and these graphs are vaguely terrifying, so I'll just leave a link in the description, but just know it's voted on by top players, not just randos you see on the ladder, still desperately trying to prove that OU Charizard is viable. I see you guys. I don't want to, but I see you. All these fucking losers out here trying to talk about the strengths of things like Raticate. So Jolteon is not an awful Pokemon. It's still in overused, it's still B ranked. So what's the problem here? Well, let's go over what this little dog can do first, and then we can really understand why it's been coming up a bit short. First things first, Jolteon is known for two things: outspeeding everyone else, besides Big Kabambo, and then slapping them with some big damage thunderbolts. It's decently versatile. You can use Jolteon as a decent anti-lead, forcing out the slower paralysis leads, although we are in the red against most sleep leads. Meanwhile, in the mid-game, Jolteon is a strong threat that can help open holes in your opponent's team for your win condition, but if you wait for Jolteon to be used in the endgame, you have a healthy Pokemon that outspeeds the entire bracket and can paralyze and then proceed to slap the actual heck out of mostly anything that the opponent has left. Our speed and special are phenomenal, and in Generation 1, this is especially good, as speed determines crit chance. So Jolteon is nailing insanely damaging crit stab thunderbolts 25% of the time. To keep that in perspective, the same chance you have to not move due to paralysis, Jolteon can just throw out a crit on a 95 base power, 99.6% accurate stab move. And that is phenomenal. Against all the overused water types, a crit is a clean one-hit KO, and even without the crit, it's still a guaranteed 2-hit. Also, I'll never have a chance to mention this ever again, but in the small gun analysis, it says that Jolteon can use Thunder to one-hit KO Cloyster with a crit, which is true, but so can Thunderbolt. Just a very small error. I had to point that out for internet points, but I mess up like 10 things a video, and I'm sure you can find a couple in this one if you look hard enough. Gotta catch them all. Back to Jolteon. Even if we're not rocking super effective damage, Thunderbolt still chunks a bunch of relevant Pokemon. It's especially notable in the Zapdos matchup, as we can pretty much effectively shrug off anything Zapdos can throw at us, especially for running Rest. Meanwhile, a crit Thunderbolt can 2-hit the bird, and even without crits or Rest, we still outpace a healthy Zapdos in damage, unless it's using Light Screen, but like, what are the odds of that? Meanwhile, against Tauros, Thunderbolt is a 3-hit, with a crit potentially reaching close to 90%. Not to even mention the fact that we outspeed the god of RBYOU, so even if Tauros gets that crit Earthquake and we go down immediately, we can still potentially swing the match in our favor, as even just paralyzing Tauros is enough to set up your win condition sometimes. Also, Snorlax is taken down in either 4 Thunderbolts or 2 crits. Definitely cheesable against the rest set, especially one without Earthquake. Even Amnesialax is not safe, due to our crits ignoring enemy stat buffs. Another reason why Slowbro can't just boost its way into beating us. So we have some great matchups, but there's some Pokemon like Executor who resist Thunderbolt, and Chansey who just has a huge special stat. So what can we do against them? Well, we have Pin Missile and Double Kick. Neither are necessarily great options, but Pin Missile does 4 times damage against Eggy, and can do anywhere from 20% with a 2-hit to potentially being able to 1-hit Eggy from full health if you get a crit 5-hit. That is banking on getting a 1/8 pin missile hit chance, times the 25-ish% crit chance though. Obviously that is a bit of a damage range, but you can usually cheese a 2 or 3 or 4 hit knockout with this move. If it hits. Oh yeah, pin missile is only 85% accurate. Of course it is, of course it is. Add that to our 1 hit chance, and yeah. So Eggy can paralyze us, put us to sleep, take us down with psychics, or just explode if it feels like it needs to. So this is not a good matchup for us, but Executor is an amazing Pokemon, and a really scary threat to be up against, typically not running any recovery options, so this could still be useful in certain situations. On the other hand, Double Kick helps us get through Chansey. While the normal damage from its move is very pitiful, getting 2 crits in a row isn't the most unrealistic thing in the world for Jolteon. Although sometimes it can be a bit of a chore. But if you have the patience of a saint, you too can click a button 3, or 4, or 10, or 20 times, and win a very important matchup. Also, Double Kick can be used to finish off a mostly dead rock type, but if they have any more than chip health left, we're gonna get blasted hard, just like that bitch Cecile. Rhydon and even the objectively worse Golem are hard counters to the electric types of Gen 1, except Raichu, but like, don't use Raichu. Use Gorachu. They seem rad as fuck. And if you don't know Gorachu, go check out Plague Von Karma's latest video on their Kanto expansion pack, or the earlier video on the lost RBY sprites. Meanwhile, while you're there poking around, check out the video on Jolteon too, because it explains how Zappy Dog goes pretty weird tearing throughout RBY's life. But we'll focus on Jolteon's placement now. So, let's leave the promotion for other, better channels behind, and focus on how much I love Groundback. Okay, back to Jolteon. I think it's time we start smashing down some of these positives, just like my dad and my hopes and dreams. Okay, so, we need Thunderbolt and we need Thunderwave. That's a given. And now we're left with a choice of what can absolutely wreck us. So Double Kick is pretty consistent, and Chansey is on every single team. So taking it is pretty much required, meaning we get the choice between Rest and Pin Missile. Rest is very useful for Zapdos, but not exactly mandatory, although running it can provide utility throughout the entire game. And then compare that to Pin Missile, which you're running for basically one Pokemon, just like Double Kick. Except Executor isn't on every team like how Chansey is. So sometimes, you just have a dead slot. You can use it against Alakazam and Jinx of course. But even against Jinx, who will go down if Snorlax even critical hits a sneeze in its general direction, a 5-hit crit Pin Missile will never 1-hit KO it. That's pathetic, honestly. Someone out there wasn't paying attention before, but is really turned on now. But anyway, it seems like the best option is probably just to run Rest, and then bring along like Cloyster or Jinx or Blizzard Starmie to nail Eggy to the cross, right? Well, no, not necessarily, because our special is great, and our speed is obviously outstanding. But the rest of our stats are, well, underperforming. Jolteon is incredibly frail. So frail that using Rest means it's highly unlikely that Jolteon will actually last the Sleep Gens. And unfortunately, because Jolteon outspeeds everything in the meta, we're guaranteed to move first on the time we wake up, and be susceptible to eat a status, as long as the opponent is willing to fish for it. Except no, we aren't actually, because it's time for the segment no one asked me to do again. Learning stuff with me without a script. I will see y'all on the other side. Alright everyone, welcome back, and let's get started. Alright, so everything about RBY Speed by Plague Von Karma. This is a wonderful article, but the only thing that I really want to talk about is down here in boosting speed, or reducing speed. And it has to do with the same thing we talked about last time we did something like this, the stat reapplication glitch. Now, I'm not going to go into all that again because I droned on about it last time, and I want to keep this a little bit more concise. But the one part of this that's really important for us to know, especially for Jolteon, is the stat drop from Paralysis does not go away when using Rest in RBY. Meaning, Jolteon using Rest to shake off Paralysis the speed drop still remains until you switch out and switch back in. So, if Jolteon's paralyzed again, the drops stack, leading to it being outspeed by even a paralyzed Snorlax. And it also means that if we get paralyzed and then use rest on the same turn, our speed drops down to 1/16 instead of 1/4. Dang. But yeah, that's really all I wanted to talk about. This is a really interesting article. I'd recommend reading the whole thing if you're interested in RBY. But I will see y'all later. Back to you, me. Okay, yeah, that was... Yeah, I don't even know if I should do that again. Comment down below if you hated it. But back on the concept of Jolteon using rest, it really has a hard time finding a safe time to use it in a match. Almost exclusively save for the Zapdos matchup. And unfortunately, Jolteon isn't Gengar, who still is useful even while asleep. Or even something like Starmie, where you can potentially cheese sleep turns against the likes of Jinx, Cloyster, or Chansey without Thunderbolt. So we hopefully could wake up. No, if we get put to sleep, either by rest or any other way, we're basically out for the match. And if Jolteon gets paralyzed, we are at a massive risk to being taken out, due to being so frail. Luckily, if both Mons are paralyzed, we can still outspeed, but both parties being paralyzed also means it's terribly unreliable. Anything can happen, and it's barely even in your control. And Jolteon has more issues than just being forced to pick 2 out of 3 moves. Because unlike Starmie rolling between Blizzard, Psychic, and Thunderbolt, we're picking between 3 moves that might help us check basically a single Pokemon each, and are completely worthless besides that. Compare that to Zapdos and Jolteon, which not only lets it check Exeggutor and Chansey, it also lets it break through Jinx and even Alakazam, due to being able to run a 4th utility move, usually Agility. But Zapdos has the freedom to run Agility because Jolteon just condenses the 2 pretty comedically bad moves that Jolteon needs to run into a move that's legitimately terrifying to a large portion of the top threats. And it's not even Zapdos' strongest move, and that's Jolteon's biggest issue in the meta. It's the Golem effect. Trying to find a team where Jolteon isn't completely outclassed by Zapdos is harder than I am thinking about my ex-wife and Jerry Trainer. I don't want to talk about Zapdos too much. Legacy viewers will remember I have a promise to talk about the bird at 650 subscribers. A weird number, I know, but I'm weird, and it's getting closer every day. But let's talk about that current meta. What's impacting Jolteon's ability to place on teams? For one, the rise in Gengar's popularity has led to a large amount of teams running Rhydon and Earthquake Reflect Lax, which have honestly been just about as bad for the Electrics as it has been for Gengar, if not worse. Because while Gengar can pivot out of most bad situations and always has access to Hypnosis and Explosion, both of the Electrics are walled endlessly by Rhydon, and Jolteon can't take less than 63% from Snorlax Earthquake. But on the flip side, it does allow a free switch to Zapdos if you can predict one. So in order to justify using Jolteon over Zapdos, we need a team that's afraid of getting swept through by Zapdos, as it's one of our best matchups and niches. And obviously Rhydon does this too, and while there's definitely merit to having 2 checks to Zapdos on your team, especially because these Pokemon can do a lot more than just check Zapdos. But like, if we're going to run the best Zapdos check, and also the second best Zapdos check, why not just run Rhydon and Zapdos? Especially important as Zapdos checks a lot of Pokemon Rhydon isn't confident at taking out, much better than Jolteon, like the aforementioned Chansey, Exeggutor, and Alakazam. But we also need a team that can help us benefit off the predictability of using Jolteon, something that can help us take advantage of the Rhydon coming our way. So what can we do? Well, looking at the RBY sample teams, there is a team that has Jolteon on it, but unfortunately it is a little outdated. I'll link the forum post in the description of the video, but despite the fact these were made in the days of Eggy being in the Big Four, this team is still pretty solid. Jolteon and Cloyster have very complementary features, as Cloyster's Clamp can let it get a free switch out to Jolteon, who generally struggles to switch in safely. Meanwhile, Jolteon can paralyze anything faster than Cloyster, allowing it to chip them with Clamp. Personally, I found success replacing Starmie with Gengar for both a second sleeper, as well as being a good sack to tank sleep also. Unfortunately, that does reduce your viability in the Rhydon matchup, which is bad. So, instead of Cloyster, who can definitely check Rhydon, but also doesn't really want to so that way it can check other Pokemon later in the game, I've been trying out Articuno as a way to swap in safely on the expected Earthquake, and then dish out some insanely powerful stab blizzards. This maintains a strong Executor counter, while also giving us an in on Earthquake Snorlax, which they'll probably have if they don't have Rhydon. But if they are running Rhydon, odds are they aren't dumb enough to stay in and eat the one-hit KO Blizzard. Maybe they would if they were using Golem, but we try to not make fun of Golem users too much here. They've already suffered enough. But for the Rhydon users who switch, but still get decently chipped somewhere in the game, we run a surprise Mega Drain in the 4th slot on Gengar. Between Articuno and Gengar checking some of each other's checks, Jolteon becomes the missing third piece of the puzzle, helping to keep the pace moving by baiting out threats and zapping the crap out of what remains afterwards. Or Rhydon's gonna guess what you're doing and rock slide your Ice Bird to death. My latest and last team for Jolteon is this. Basically the same as the last one, but we're gonna be using Executor instead of Articuno. This gives us an amazing sleeper who can swap into either a turn 1 Thunder Wave or turn 1 Psychic, while also resisting Earthquake from Rhydon, and being the only consistent way to paralyze it. On top of that, because we're running Executor, we can remove Sing on Chansey. Normally, I would run Thunderbolt, but if you're exceptionally afraid of Rhydon, you can take Reflect and wall him completely. But usually Executor and Gengar with Mega Drain are more than enough to take it down. And yeah, this is my Jolteon team. I think it's pretty good. Maybe not objectively better than the sample, but slightly modernized and pretty decently capable. Comment down below if you've got a better one, or if you're a Golem stan that I've managed to piss off. Either way though, the amount of problems I had trying to come up with a viable team, along with only having one viable sample team, are both very telling, as is all of the aforementioned scary math showing the drop-off. That doesn't mean Jolteon isn't a great Pokemon. It has a ton of amazing traits that others would love to have. On paper, it is incredible, but it's lacking in just enough places that eventually, I'm going to predict that it's going to have yet another fall from grace out of OU in the future. Which means once it gets banned for absolutely destroying UU, I suppose Lapras and Hypno are going to get another friend in their tier. It's honestly a little sad. Too good for one home, yet not enough for another. I feel you, Jolteon. I really do. But yeah, that's what's going on with Jolteon in RBY OU. I'm honestly really excited to see how this plays out in next year's viability rankings. But in the meantime, subscribe to see the next video, comment down below what you would like to see next, and I'll catch y'all next time.